Story 1. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I navigated the bustling aisles of Walmart, my shopping list clutched tightly in one hand. The familiar scent of cleaning supplies mixed with the faint aroma of fresh produce filled the air, but today, it was the chaotic energy of the crowd that kept my heart racing. I had always found solace in these mundane errands, the simplicity of selecting groceries providing a comforting rhythm to my otherwise hectic life. Yet, there was something about this particular day that felt different. I glanced at my list, mentally ticking off items as I moved toward the produce section. Apples, bananas, spinach, simple staples for the week ahead. As I reached for a bunch of bananas, I felt a prickling sensation at the back of my neck as if someone were watching me. I turned slightly, scanning the faces around me, but all I saw were busy shoppers engrossed in their own tasks. Shaking off the feeling, I returned to my list, convincing myself it was just paranoia. "Excuse me, miss?" A voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to find an elderly man struggling to reach for a box on a high shelf. "Oh, here, let me help you with that," I said, stepping forward and retrieving the box for him. "Thank you, dear. My back isn't what it used to be," he chuckled, his eyes sparkling with gratitude. "No problem at all," I smiled, feeling a wave of warmth wash over me. It was moments like these that reminded me of the kindness in the world, a stark contrast to the sense of unease that had briefly crept in. As I continued my shopping, the feeling returned, stronger this time. I couldn't shake the sensation that someone was observing me. I glanced over my shoulder but only saw the typical bustle of shoppers. I tried to dismiss it, focusing instead on the task at hand. I picked up a few more items, making my way toward the checkout when I noticed a man lingering near the entrance, his gaze fixed on me. His features were obscured by shadows, but something about him made my stomach churn. "Get a grip, Sarah," I muttered under my breath, trying to quell the rising anxiety. I picked up my pace, hoping to reach the safety of my car quickly. As I stepped outside, the warm Miami air enveloped me, a stark contrast to the climate-controlled store. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling. The parking lot was a sea of vehicles, and I squinted to locate my car, parked a little further down. That's when I saw him again, the man from inside. He stood by a black SUV, his eyes locked onto me, a predatory glint in his gaze. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. I forced myself to look away, focusing on my car, but I could sense him moving, inching closer. What was I thinking? I should have asked for help or alerted someone. But as I reached my vehicle, I fumbled with my keys, my hands trembling. "Just get in the car, Sarah. You'll be fine," I whispered to myself, my voice barely audible over the chaotic sounds of the parking lot. I could feel my breath quickening, a primal instinct urging me to flee. Just then my phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me. I pulled it out, glancing at the screen. A message from my dad, a simple, "How's your day going?" Should have calmed me, but instead it heightened my anxiety. I looked up again, and to my horror, the man was mere feet away from me, his intentions unreadable. "Hey, is everything okay?" he asked, his voice smooth, but I could sense a darkness lurking beneath. Yeah, I stammered, trying to maintain composure, but my instincts screamed that something was terribly wrong. "Let me help you with that," he said, moving closer. I backed away, fumbling for my keys, desperation clawing at my throat. "No, I'm fine. Really." But as I turned to unlock my car, I felt a rush of cold air and darkness enveloping me, the last thing I remember being the echo of my own heartbeat in my ears as the world faded away. As I stepped out of Walmart, the sun hung low in the Miami sky, casting long shadows across the parking lot. My arms were laden with bags, the slight strain of their weight a comforting reminder of the mundane life I led. My mind was still buzzing with thoughts of the groceries I had picked up, milk, eggs, a bit of fruit. I was so engrossed in my shopping list that I hadn't noticed the man in the distance, lurking behind a row of cars, watching me. Suddenly, I felt a chill run down my spine, an inexplicable sense that something was off. I glanced around, my heart quickening, but I brushed it aside. This was just the aftermath of a long day, I reasoned. I took a deep breath and walked towards my silver sedan, my keys clutched tightly in one hand. As I approached my car, I heard a noise that made my stomach drop. Footsteps. I turned just in time to see a figure emerge from the shadows. My heart raced as the man lunged at me. "Get in," he growled, his voice filled with a chilling authority that froze me in place. Before I could react, he grabbed my arm and yanked me backward, pulling me into the back seat of his vehicle. Panic surged through my veins like fire. I fought back, kicking and screaming, desperate to break free. "Let me go. Help. Somebody help me." I screamed, my voice echoing against the metal and concrete. "Shut up," he hissed, his grip tightening around my mouth. In that moment, the world outside blurred into insignificance. My focus was solely on escaping this nightmare. I thrashed against him, my fists pounding against his chest, but he was stronger, overpowering me with ease. "Stop it. You're only making this harder for yourself," he shouted, frustration seeping into his voice. I could see his eyes, wild and filled with a dark determination. He was a predator and I was the prey. Just then, my phone buzzed in my pocket, and Jacob's eyes flickered with a moment of confusion. I took advantage of that instant, kicking him hard in the shin. He grunted in pain, but it was enough to shift his focus. I scrambled to reach my phone, hoping against hope that it was my father calling. "Sarah? Sarah." I heard my dad's voice on the other end, filled with a mix of concern and confusion. "Where are you? Is everything okay?" I pressed the phone to my ear, muffled sounds escaping my lips. "Dad, help." But Jacob's hand closed around my throat, cutting off my words. I could hear my father's frantic voice, but the connection was lost, and I was left with nothing but the suffocating grip of my captor. "Stop screaming or I'll make you regret it," Jacob warned, his eyes narrowing dangerously. The weight of his threat hung in the air and my heart sank. I had to think fast. I needed to escape to survive. I glanced around the back seat, searching for anything I could use. My mind raced with thoughts of my father, the way he would always tell me to stay alert, to trust my instincts. I had never imagined I would need that advice more than ever. "Please just let me go," I pleaded, my voice shaking. "I won't tell anyone. I swear." For a brief moment, Jacob hesitated, and I seized the opportunity. I kicked again, this time aiming for his face. My foot connected, and he recoiled, momentarily stunned. I scrambled to the door handle, desperate for a way out, but he recovered too quickly. "Enough," he shouted, his face twisted in anger. "You're coming with me whether you like it or not." I realized then that my struggle was just beginning. With every ounce of strength I had left, I fought back, fueled by the thought of my father, the life I had built, and the hope that I would somehow escape this nightmare. But as Jacob tightened his grip once more, I couldn't shake the feeling that my world was unraveling, and I was caught in a dark web of terror that I might never escape. As I stood there in the parking lot, my mind raced with confusion and fear. The air was thick with tension, and even though the sun was shining brightly above, a shadow loomed over my heart. I had just witnessed the unthinkable. Sarah, my daughter, had been taken right in front of my eyes. The last moments replayed in my mind like a nightmarish film loop. One moment she was walking toward her car, and the next, a man lunged at her, overpowering her with an ease that sent chills through my spine. "Sir, are you all right?" A young officer interrupted my thoughts, pulling me back to reality. I glanced at the officer, barely processing his question as I shook my head, feeling the weight of despair crushing my chest. No, I'm not all right. My daughter, she was just here." I stammered, desperation clawing at my throat. "You have to find her. Please." "Calm down, sir. We're doing everything we can," he assured me, his tone trying to be soothing, but it only fueled my anxiety. I could see other officers gathering evidence, taking witness statements, and I was struck by how methodical they were. But in my panic, their actions felt futile. How could they possibly understand the urgency of the situation? "I need to talk to someone in charge," I demanded, my voice rising. "I need to tell them what I saw." Just then, a tall figure approached us, Detective Officer Lane, I later learned. He had an air of authority that momentarily steadied my racing heart. His eyes scanned the scene, taking in the chaos around him before landing on me. "Mr. Mitchell? I'm Officer Lane. I'm leading the investigation," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Can you tell me what you saw?" I took a deep breath, forcing myself to focus. I was just here to pick her up. She was coming out of the store and then, it happened so fast. This man grabbed her, pulled her into a car. I didn't even get a good look at him. "Did you notice anything at all about the car?" Officer Lane pressed, his pen poised over his notepad. "It was a dark SUV, maybe black or dark blue," I replied, my heart racing as I recalled the horrifying scene. "I think it had a dent on the back bumper. It all happened so quickly. Thank you. Every detail helps. We'll get a bulletin out to the other officers," he said, nodding as he made quick notes. "Did you see if anyone else was around?" I don't know. I was just focused on Sarah. I didn't think." My voice cracked and I felt a surge of guilt wash over me. I should have done something. I should have grabbed her. I should have. "Stop," Officer Lane said firmly but not unkindly. "You did what you could. We'll find her, I promise." As he moved on to gather more evidence, I felt a mix of hope and despair. Would they really find her? What if they didn't? The thought of Sarah, my sweet, innocent daughter, being out there with that monster made my stomach churn. I caught sight of a woman nearby, her eyes wide with shock as she relayed her account to another officer. "I saw the whole thing," she said, her voice trembling. "He just grabbed her and threw her into the car like she was nothing." "Did you see his face?" the officer asked, jotting down notes. "No, it happened so fast, but I think he had dark hair," she replied, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." I felt a wave of anger surge through me. How could this happen? Why didn't anyone do anything? The parking lot had been filled with people just moments before, and yet no one had stepped in to help. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was all my fault, a parent's worst nightmare unfolding before my very eyes. "David." Officer Lane's voice broke through my spiral of despair. "We've got a lead on the vehicle. We need you to stay close in case we need more information." I nodded, determination flooding through me. "I'm not going anywhere until I know my daughter is safe." As I stood there, hope and dread battling within me, I couldn't help but wonder about the man who had taken her. Who was he? Why had he chosen Sarah? And would I ever see my daughter again? The questions swirled in my mind, but deep down, I clung to the hope that somehow, someway I would get her back. The air was thick with the smell of rust and dust as I sat in the dimly lit corner of the warehouse, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear Jacob's footsteps echoing as he paced back and forth, his frustration building with every passing second. "You think you can just outsmart me?" he growled, his voice low and menacing. I shivered, the fear creeping up my spine, but I steeled myself. I couldn't let him see my weakness. I scanned the room looking for anything that could help me escape. Old crates lined the walls, and the faint light filtering through the cracked windows cast eerie shadows across the floor. Every creak of the building felt like a countdown, the minutes slipping away as I plotted my next move. I had to be smart. I had to wait for the right moment. Suddenly I heard a loud crash outside. My heart raced as I strained to listen. Were those sirens? A rush of hope surged through me, but it was quickly followed by doubt. Jacob would be on high alert now. "What is that?" he muttered to himself, his voice laced with anger. I took a deep breath, reminding myself to stay calm. I had to think clearly. "Jacob," I called out, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "You don't want to do this. You can still walk away." He whipped around, eyes narrowing, and for a moment, I saw the flicker of uncertainty in his gaze. "You think you can talk your way out of this?" he snapped. "I've spent too long planning this." I risked a glance at the door, still half open and revealing the chaos unfolding outside. I could hear distant shouts, the clatter of boots against concrete, and the unmistakable sound of police radios crackling. This was my chance. "You're not a monster, Jacob," I pressed on, trying to reach the part of him that still felt human. "You don't have to go down this road." He took a step closer and I could see the conflict in his eyes. "You don't know anything about me," he spat, but I sensed the cracks beginning to form in his facade. "Then let me know you," I said, my voice softening. "Let me help you." "Help me?" he laughed, a harsh sound that echoed around the empty warehouse. "You think I need your help? I'm the one in control here." Just then the door exploded open and a squad of officers stormed in, weapons drawn. "Police! Hands up!" a commanding voice boomed and Jacob's face twisted in rage. "Damn it!" he cursed, turning his attention away from me. This was it. I seized the moment, adrenaline surging as I launched myself towards the nearest crate. I could hear the officers shouting orders, but all I focused on was getting free. "Sarah." I heard a familiar voice call out, cutting through the chaos. "Dad." I shouted, my heart leaping at the sound of my father's voice. But I couldn't let Jacob know I was distracted. He was still a threat and I needed to keep him off balance. "Stay back," Jacob yelled, pulling out a knife, his face twisted with desperation. "I'll hurt her. I swear I will." "Don't do this, Jacob," one of the officers shouted, trying to reason with him. "Put the weapon down and we can talk this through." "Shut up," Jacob screamed, his eyes wild. I could see the sweat glistening on his forehead, the knife shaking slightly in his grip. He was losing control and I had to exploit that. I crouched low, inching toward an old metal pipe lying on the ground, my fingers wrapping around its cool surface. It wasn't much, but it was something. "You're not in control, Jacob," I said, my voice steady. "You're scared. Just like me." In that moment I saw the flicker of doubt cross his face. "You don't know what I'm capable of," he hissed, but there was a tremor in his voice now. "Neither do you," I shot back, my heart racing. "You think this is going to end well for you? You'll lose everything." The officers were closing in and I could see my father's silhouette standing at the entrance, his face a mask of fear and determination. "Sarah." "Stay back," he shouted, desperation lacing his voice. But I couldn't. I needed to fight for my freedom. Jacob's grip tightened on the knife and I prepared for the worst. But I wouldn't go down without a fight. I raised the metal pipe, ready to defend myself, and in that moment, everything hung in the balance. The chaos outside, the fear inside, and the hope that I could break free from this nightmare. I felt the cold grip of fear tighten around me as I stood in the dim light of the warehouse, my heart pounding like a drum. I had managed to wiggle free from the ropes that bound me, but the adrenaline coursing through my veins was overshadowed by a profound sense of dread. Jacob was still in the building, and I had no idea where he was or what he was capable of in this moment of desperation. Suddenly, I heard the shattering sound of footsteps and muffled voices just outside the door. My breath caught in my throat. It had to be the police. Detective Lane and his team had finally arrived. I had to warn them. I stumbled toward the sound, my bare feet slapping against the cold concrete floor as I fought the urge to hide. I needed to confront this monster to help put an end to this nightmare for good. Detective, I shouted, my voice hoarse but insistent. The footsteps slowed, and I could see the faint outline of a figure through the cracks in the door. He's here. The door burst open and an explosion of light flooded the room. Detective Lane stepped in, his serious expression softening momentarily when he saw me. Sarah, thank God you're okay. He moved toward me, but I raised my hand to stop him. Wait, he's still here. I gasped, my eyes darting around the room. Jacob is here. Before I could finish my warning, a shadow lunged from the back of the warehouse. Jacob emerged, his eyes wild and filled with a mix of rage and desperation. No one is leaving, he screamed, brandishing a knife that glinted ominously in the harsh light. You all think you can just take her from me? The tension in the room escalated. Detective Lane raised his weapon, his voice steady but firm. Jacob, put the knife down. This is your only chance to surrender peacefully. Peacefully? Jacob laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. You think I'm going to just let her go? She's mine. I felt a surge of anger. I'm not yours. You don't own me. I shouted, stepping forward defiantly. In that moment, Jacob's face contorted with confusion and rage, and he turned his attention back to me. You don't understand. I know things about you, things that will make everyone question you. His voice trembled, revealing his instability. What are you talking about? I demanded, my heart racing. You don't know anything about me. He edged closer, his knife glinting dangerously. Oh, but I do. You're not the innocent girl you pretend to be. Your past is darker than you think. You wanted this. You wanted me to find you. Stop it. Detective Lane shouted, trying to regain control of the situation. This isn't helping you. Let's not make it worse. But Jacob's laughter echoed through the warehouse, filled with a manic energy. You can't save her. She's already chosen. In that moment, the chaos erupted. Detective Lane's team moved in, and the air filled with tense shouts and the sound of scuffling feet. I felt a rush of panic as I realized I was caught in the middle of a storm. Jacob lunged toward Lane and I screamed, "No!" The detective barely dodged, and in a whirlwind of action, officers surrounded Jacob, trying to wrest the knife from his grip. I backed away, my heart racing as the struggle intensified. I wanted to help, but I couldn't even think straight. Finally, with a swift maneuver, one of the officers managed to disarm Jacob, sending the knife skidding across the floor. The room fell silent for a moment, the tension palpable. Jacob was subdued, but the chaos had taken its toll. I stumbled back, breathless, as Detective Lane approached me, concern etched on his face. Are you okay? He asked, his voice low. I think so, I replied, still reeling from the adrenaline. But then as I looked around, I noticed something alarming. My father, David, was nowhere to be seen. Where's my dad? I asked, panic rising in my chest. Detective Lane's expression darkened. He was supposed to stay outside. We need to find him. Before he could say more, the room felt suddenly empty. The adrenaline faded, leaving a chilling realization in its wake. As the officers led Jacob away, I felt a sense of dread wash over me. I had escaped, but at what cost? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, an unsettling sense of loss that gnawed at me. In the aftermath of the chaos, I turned to Detective Lane, desperation creeping into my voice. I need to find him, now. But as the words left my lips, I couldn't shake the sense that the nightmare was far from over. The dim light flickered as I stepped cautiously into the hidden room, the air thick with the weight of unspoken horrors. Officer Lane had led the way, his flashlight illuminating the walls adorned with newspaper clippings, photographs, and notes, all meticulously arranged. My heart raced as I realized the extent of Jacob's depravity. Each face was a reminder of a life stolen, and I felt a chill crawl up my spine as I scanned the images of his past victims. But one picture stopped me in my tracks, a faded snapshot of Sarah taken at a distance, her smile frozen in time. "David," Lane's voice broke through my haze. "You need to see this." He gestured towards a large board covered in disturbing details, dates, locations, and what appeared to be the names of Jacob's victims. "He's been at this for years, and it seems like he had a particular obsession with Sarah." I felt bile rise in my throat. "She's still out there, isn't she? We need to find her. Now." The urgency of my words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Lane nodded, his brow furrowed in thought. "We'll do everything we can. But I need you to stay strong, David. This is going to get complicated." As he spoke, my phone buzzed in my pocket, jolting me from my thoughts. I pulled it out, my heart pounding as I saw Sarah's name flash across the screen. My hands trembled as I opened the message, but what I read made my blood run cold. "I'm alive, Dad. I had to leave." "I'm sorry, what?" I shouted, the words echoing in the cramped space. "This can't be happening." I felt disoriented as fear clawed at my insides. "What do you mean you had to leave?" Lane stepped closer, peering over my shoulder. "What does it say?" I showed him the screen and his expression hardened. "We need to trace her phone. Now." But as I fumbled with the device, a sense of dread washed over me. What could have driven her to this? Why would she abandon me when I was fighting to save her? The questions spiraled in my mind, each one more painful than the last. "David," Lane said, pulling me back to reality, "there's more to this than we thought. If she orchestrated her own disappearance, we need to understand her motivations. This isn't just about Jacob anymore." I shook my head, refusing to accept the implications. "No, she wouldn't do that. She's scared, Lane. You don't understand what she's been through." But Officer Lane's gaze was steady, filled with a blend of compassion and urgency. "You need to trust me. We have to think like her. What would make her feel like this was her only option?" As we stood in that room, surrounded by darkness and despair, I realized just how little I understood my own daughter. Had her experiences with Jacob twisted her perception of safety so profoundly that she felt her only escape was to run? "Let's find her," I said, my voice firm despite the tremor in my heart. "I won't stop until I bring her home." Lane nodded, determination flashing in his eyes. "We'll set up a trace on her phone. If she's alive, we'll find her. But you need to prepare yourself for anything." The weight of his words settled heavily on my shoulders as we left the hidden room, a sense of urgency propelling us forward. But deep down, a gnawing fear lingered. What if Sarah had chosen this path for a reason? What if the truth was darker than I could bear? As we made our way back to the car, my mind raced through the possibilities. I glanced at Lane, who was focused on his phone, coordinating with the team. "Do you think she could be in danger?" Lane looked up, his expression grave. "If she's with Jacob, we need to move quickly. But if she's chosen to disappear, we need to tread carefully. We don't want to push her further away." The uncertainty hung between us like a thick fog, and as we drove away from the warehouse, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing Sarah all over again. This time not to a monster but to her own choices. Story 2. The warm sun hung high over El Paso, casting a golden hue on the bustling streets as I hurried toward Walmart. My heart raced with the excitement of shopping for my son's upcoming school year. I had made a list, meticulously jotting down everything he would need: notebooks, pencils, and a backpack that wasn't too childish. I could almost picture his face lighting up at the sight of his new supplies, and that thought fueled my energy as I pushed through the sliding doors of the store. Inside, the air was filled with the familiar scent of freshly printed paper and the faint aroma of popcorn from the nearby snack aisle. Shoppers moved about with purpose, some chatting animatedly while others, like me, were deep in thought. I spotted a few familiar faces from the neighborhood, and I offered a warm smile to Mrs. Thompson, who stood with her daughter, both of them examining a colorful set of markers. "Sarah, are you ready for another school year?" Mrs. Thompson called out, her voice bright and cheerful. I chuckled softly. "As ready as I'll ever be. Just checking off my list. How about you?" "We're in full swing. I think I might need a second mortgage to pay for everything," she joked, rolling her eyes. We shared a laugh, the kind that made the mundane feel a little lighter. As I moved further into the store, I couldn't shake the feeling of urgency. The aisles seemed to stretch endlessly, filled with rows of supplies that could easily swallow me whole if I wasn't careful. I grabbed a pack of crayons and tossed it into my cart, my mind wandering to thoughts of my son Jake, and how he would proudly show off his colorful drawings to me after school. Meanwhile, outside the store, Javier, the security guard, was conducting his routine patrol. I had seen him a few times during my visits. He was a tall man with a kind face, someone who exuded a sense of calm even in the chaos of the store. I caught a glimpse of him through the glass doors, his eyes scanning the parking lot with a focused determination. "Just another day at the office," he muttered to himself, adjusting the radio on his belt. He had hoped for a quiet day, where he could simply keep watch and ensure the safety of the shoppers. However, there was an unsettling tension in the air that day, one that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. In a car parked just outside, Derek sat gripping the steering wheel, his heart pounding in his chest. The chaos and noise of the bustling store felt miles away, yet it echoed in his mind like a relentless drumbeat. He glanced at the weapon resting on the passenger seat, a cold metal object that made every fiber of his being scream in protest. But he had convinced himself that this was the only way to make a statement. "Just breathe," he whispered to himself, his voice trembling. "You're doing this for a reason." The words felt hollow, but he clung to them as a lifeline, trying to drown out the voices in his head that questioned his intentions. Back inside, I continued to gather supplies, unaware of the storm brewing just outside. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out to see a message from Jake's school about a supply list update. I sighed, a mix of relief and annoyance at the never-ending tasks of motherhood. "Just a few more things and then we can go home, buddy," I murmured to myself, thinking of how I'd reward Jake with his favorite ice cream after our shopping spree. That thought kept me grounded, but little did I know that the day was about to take a turn I could never have anticipated. The world outside continued to spin, unaware of the intertwining fates that would soon collide within the walls of that store. The sun shone brightly, contrasting the darkness that was slowly creeping in, ready to change everything. I pushed my cart down the brightly lit aisle of Walmart, my mind buzzing with the tasks ahead. The scent of fresh produce mingled with the faint aroma of cleaning supplies, a comforting reminder of the ordinary life I was trying to maintain. My son Lucas was at home with a babysitter, and I was determined to make this shopping trip efficient. School supplies were on sale and I couldn't afford to miss out. As I grabbed a pack of colored pencils, I noticed Mrs. Rodriguez from the neighborhood at the end of the aisle. She was chatting with another mother, her laughter ringing out like a bell. I smiled, the warmth of community filling me with a fleeting sense of normalcy. "Hey, Mrs. Rodriguez," I called, waving as I pushed my cart closer. "Sarah, how are you? Is Lucas ready for school?" she asked, her face lighting up. "Getting there. Just picking up a few last-minute things," I replied, glancing at my list. "What about you?" "Oh, you know how it is. Always something to do," she chuckled, her eyes sparkling. We exchanged a few more pleasantries before parting ways, and I felt a twinge of contentment. Meanwhile, Javier was on his usual patrol, his eyes scanning the bustling store. He had hoped for a quiet day, but the weight of responsibility sat heavily on his shoulders. The store was filled with families and shoppers, each lost in their world, unaware of the shadows lurking just outside. "Javier, come in," crackled the radio on his belt, pulling him from his thoughts. "Go ahead," he responded, pushing through the automatic doors to the entrance. "We've got a report of a suspicious individual loitering outside. Keep an eye out," the dispatcher instructed. Javier's instincts kicked in. He peered through the glass doors, spotting a young man with wild eyes and an aura that screamed trouble. "Copy that. I'm on it," he muttered, his heart racing. He knew he had to be alert, something about the man felt off, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go wrong. As Derek stood by his car, he took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the weapon hidden beneath his seat. The engine of the car hummed quietly, but inside, a storm brewed. Each moment felt stretched, a painful reminder of the demons that had haunted him for years. Today was supposed to be different. Today he would make a statement. "Just breathe," he whispered to himself, trying to steady his racing thoughts. "You're doing this for a reason." He glanced back at the store, the bustling shoppers oblivious to the chaos that would soon ensue. He stepped out of the car, the weight of the gun heavy against his side, but it felt like a strange sort of freedom. He walked toward the entrance, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and exhilaration. Each step echoed in his mind, drowning out the whispers of doubt. Inside the store, I felt a sudden chill, as if the air itself had thickened. I glanced around, noticing the laughter and chatter around me, but something felt off. I shook my head, trying to dispel the unease creeping in. I resumed my shopping, grabbing notebooks and pens, determined to keep my focus on Lucas and the school year ahead. "Can I help you find anything?" a cheerful employee asked, breaking my train of thought. "No, thank you. I'm just browsing," I replied, forcing a smile. But even as I spoke, a part of me felt a nagging tension. It was a strange contrast to the vibrant colors of the school supplies surrounding me. I made my way to the checkout line, unaware of the storm brewing just outside, where Javier was quickly realizing that his instincts might have been right after all. "Hey you. Can I get you to move along?" Javier called out, approaching Derek with caution. He could feel the tension in the air, the way time seemed to slow as he prepared for whatever was about to unfold. Derek looked up, a flash of surprise crossing his face, but it was quickly replaced by something darker. "I'm just waiting for someone," he said, his voice flat, but the underlying threat was palpable. "Yeah. Well, you've got to keep moving, buddy," Javier replied, his heart pounding in his chest, knowing he had to de-escalate the situation before it spiraled out of control. Little did we know, the clock was ticking, and in just moments the world would shift beneath our feet, shattering the fragile peace of that summer day in El Paso. The sound of gunfire erupted like thunder in the quiet of the store, shattering the mundane chatter of shoppers and filling the air with a deafening cacophony. I froze, heart racing, as I instinctively pulled my son Ethan closer to me, crouching low behind a shelf stacked high with school supplies. A moment ago we had been laughing over cartoon character notebooks, and now, all I could hear was the piercing sound of screams punctuating the chaos. "Mom? What's happening?" Ethan's voice trembled, his wide eyes darting around the aisle, searching for answers that I didn't have. "Should baby stay quiet?" I whispered urgently, my heart pounding in my chest. The fear that gripped me was palpable, a suffocating weight pressing down on my lungs. I could hear the frantic footsteps of shoppers racing for the exits, the sound of carts crashing and the sharp, echoing pops of gunfire. Each shot sent a jolt of terror through me, reminding me that we were trapped in a nightmare. In that moment I thought of Javier, the security guard I had seen earlier, who always seemed so composed. I hoped he was doing something, anything, to help. As I tried to calm Ethan, I imagined him sweeping through the aisles, guiding people to safety, his determined expression unwavering. My thoughts were interrupted by a loud crash as a woman stumbled into our aisle, her eyes wide with panic. "Help! He's shooting. We need to get out," she shouted, but her voice was drowned out by another volley of shots. I pressed a finger to my lips, signaling her to keep quiet, but fear had taken hold of her, and she bolted past us, disappearing into the mass of chaos. Suddenly I caught sight of a figure in the distance, Javier. He was yelling into his radio, trying to direct people toward the back of the store, all while keeping his own body between the shoppers and the source of the terror. I wanted to scream his name to let him know I was there, but I couldn't risk drawing attention to us. I felt a surge of gratitude for him in that moment, a flicker of hope amid the despair. Meanwhile, outside, Derek was consumed by an unsettling thrill. I could see him through the gaps in the shelves, a silhouette of chaos, his face twisted in a mix of rage and exhilaration. He was a stranger to me, but in that moment he embodied every horror story I had ever heard. My heart sank as I realized that he was someone who had chosen this path of destruction, a man driven by hatred and a misguided sense of purpose. As the shots continued to ring out, I could see Javier moving closer to the entrance, his body taut with determination. "Everyone listen to me. We need to get to the back." "Stay low," he shouted, his voice cutting through the panic like a beacon. I wanted to scream for him to come back to take cover, but my voice felt trapped in my throat. "Mom, I'm scared." Ethan clung to my arm, his small fingers digging into my skin. I turned to him, forcing a smile despite the terror swirling around us. "I know, sweetheart. Just stay close to me. We'll be okay." Another series of shots rang out and I felt the ground shake beneath me. I couldn't tell if it was the gunfire or the trembling of my own legs. I glanced at Javier again, who was now crouched low, eyes scanning the aisles for anyone who might need help. He was so brave, and in that moment I felt a swell of admiration for him. Suddenly, a heavy silence fell over the store, and for a brief moment, I dared to hope that it was over. But then I heard the distinct sound of footsteps approaching and my heart dropped. I had no idea where the shooter was, and the dread settled back in my stomach like a stone. "Stay down, Ethan," I hissed, pulling him tighter against me. I could feel his small body shaking, and it broke my heart to see him so frightened. The world outside our little hiding place felt unreal, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I wanted to shield him from everything, the violence, the hatred, and the chaos, but all I could do was hold him close and pray that we would make it out alive. The air was thick with chaos, the piercing screams of panicked shoppers echoing in my ears as I pressed my back against the cold, hard wall of the store. I could feel my son's small frame trembling beside me, his little fingers clutching onto my shirt as if he were afraid to let go. "Mommy, what's happening?" he whimpered, his wide eyes darting around the dimly lit corner we had squeezed into, hidden behind an array of discarded shopping carts. "Shoo, baby, it's going to be okay," I whispered, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The sounds of gunfire rang out like thunderclaps, each shot sending a jolt of fear through my body. I couldn't bear the thought of what was happening just beyond the shelves. "Just stay close to me, okay?" I could hear the sounds of footsteps rushing past, people trying to escape, and in that moment, I hoped against hope that the shooter would not come our way. I wanted nothing more than to shield my son from the horror unfolding around us, but I could feel the panic creeping in, threatening to drown out my resolve. Meanwhile, a few aisles over, I spotted Javier, the security guard, moving with a purpose. He seemed out of place amidst the chaos, his face set in grim determination. I had seen him many times before, always watching over the store, but now he was a beacon of bravery in a sea of terror. He shouted, trying to direct customers toward the exits, his voice cutting through the noise. "This way. Head to the back. Stay low." But his words were drowned out by the cacophony of fear and confusion. I watched him, my heart racing as he bravely confronted the shooter, doing everything he could to buy us time. "Hey, you. Over here," he yelled, diverting the gunman's attention just as I heard another round of shots fired. My breath caught in my throat as I witnessed the chaos unfold. Would he be able to distract him long enough? "Mommy, I'm scared," my son said, his voice barely above a whisper. I turned to him, forcing a smile that felt foreign on my lips. "I know, honey. But we have to stay quiet and keep each other safe. Just hold on tight." The sound of sirens wailed in the distance, a haunting reminder that help was on the way, but would it arrive in time? My mind raced with thoughts of what could happen next. Suddenly, I heard a loud crash followed by a scream. My heart dropped as I realized that time was running out. I wanted to reach out to Javier to tell him to be careful, but the words lodged in my throat. In a fit of desperation, I glanced around, searching for another way out. My instincts kicked in. I had to get my son to safety. "We need to move, baby," I said, my voice trembling but resolute. "We can't stay here." I wrapped my arm around him, ready to make a run for it when I saw Javier again, struggling but still standing tall, trying to usher people away from the chaos. "Come on. This way," he shouted, glancing back at the shooter, who had momentarily paused. In that split second I saw an opportunity. "Now," I urged my son, and we bolted towards the back of the store, my heart pounding in sync with our quickening footsteps. Just as we turned the corner, I heard another volley of shots and my stomach dropped. I couldn't look back. I had to focus on getting us out. I could feel the heat of the moment bearing down on me, the adrenaline coursing through my veins, propelling us forward. As we reached the emergency exit, I hesitated for just a moment, knowing that behind us, chaos reigned supreme. "Mommy, please," my son cried, pulling my hand. With a deep breath, I pushed open the door, the cool air hitting us like a wave of relief. But as we stepped outside, the reality of the situation began to sink in. Police cars were pulling up, officers rushing toward the entrance, their weapons drawn. It was a scene straight out of a nightmare, and yet here we were, on the brink of escaping but with the terror still alive in our minds. "Stay close," I instructed my son as we made our way towards the officers. I couldn't shake the image of Javier from my mind. His bravery, his determination, and the question of whether he would make it out alive. I wanted to scream for him, to call out his name, but all I could do was push forward, praying that he would be okay. I felt the sharp sting of adrenaline coursing through my veins as I clutched my son Max, in the cramped space between a shelf of cereal boxes and a display of school supplies. His little body trembled against me, and I could hear the faint whimpering that escaped his lips. "Mommy, I'm scared," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the chaos that erupted around us. "Shush, sweetie. Just stay quiet. We'll be okay," I murmured, trying to infuse my words with a courage I didn't truly feel. My heart raced as I listened to the cacophony, screams, the shattering of glass, and the unmistakable sound of gunfire that punctuated the air like a horrifying melody. It was surreal, as if I were trapped in a nightmare from which I couldn't wake. Just moments before, I had been in the aisle, contemplating whether to buy the blue or red folders for Max. But now that decision felt trivial, overshadowed by the terror that enveloped the store. I could see shadows moving in the distance, figures darting past the aisles, people desperately trying to escape. I could barely process the chaos, my mind racing with thoughts of Max and the need to protect him at all costs. Outside, I could hear the distant wail of sirens approaching, but they felt like an eternity away. I squeezed Max closer, my fingers digging into his small shoulders, a silent promise that I wouldn't let anything happen to him. We're going to get out of here, I promise, I whispered, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps drew my attention. I held my breath, convinced it was the shooter, but instead I saw Javier, the security guard, moving through the chaos, his uniform slightly torn but his eyes sharp and focused. "This way," he shouted, waving to a group of us huddled nearby. It took everything in me to resist the urge to bolt toward him. Was it safe? Would he lead us into further danger? But what choice did I have? "Max, on my count we're going to move, okay? Just stay close to me," I instructed, pulling him to his feet. He nodded, tears brimming in his eyes, and I felt my heart break a little more. 3, 2, 1, go. I urged, and we darted out from our hiding spot, weaving through the aisles toward Javier. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears as we ran, the world around us blurring into a whirlwind of panic. "Get to the back," Javier yelled, his voice a beacon of authority amidst the chaos. "I'll cover you." I didn't look back. I just focused on getting Max to safety. As we ran, I could hear the shots ringing out again, echoing through the store, and I felt a sickening twist in my stomach. Where was the shooter? Was he still firing? Just as we reached the back of the store, I heard a thud behind us and instinctively turned to see Javier collapse near the entrance. "No, Javier!" I screamed, my heart sinking as I realized he had been hit. His body lay sprawled on the floor, and for a brief moment, time stood still. "Mommy!" Max cried, grabbing my hand tightly. "We have to help him." "No, Max. We can't. We have to keep moving." I pulled him away, the anguish in my chest threatening to overwhelm me. I wanted to help Javier, to save him, but I knew that staying would only put us in danger. We reached the emergency exit, and I pushed the door open, the blinding light of the outside world flooding in. I hesitated for a moment, fear gripping me. What lay beyond those doors? Would it be safer than inside? But then I felt Max tugging at my arm, desperation in his eyes. "Let's go, Mommy," he urged, and I stepped into the light, dragging him behind me. The moment we emerged, I could see law enforcement swarming the area, officers shouting orders and ambulances lining the street. It was a scene of chaos, but it was also a glimmer of hope. As we stumbled into the open air, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief wash over me. We were out. We were alive. Over here. I heard an officer call, gesturing for us to come closer. I glanced back at the store, the horror still unfolding inside, and my heart ached for those left behind. For Javier. Max clung to my side as we approached the officers, the fear still etched on his little face. I wrapped my arm around him protectively, knowing that while we had escaped, the scars of this day would linger far longer than the physical wounds. The cool evening air wrapped around me as I stood at the edge of the community vigil, the flickering candlelight illuminating the faces of those gathered. Each flame was a silent tribute to the lives lost, a reminder of the shattered families and the futures stolen. I could feel the weight of grief pressing down on me, but I was determined to honor the memories of the victims, to channel my sorrow into something meaningful. I clutched the small candle in my hand, the wax warm against my palm, and listened as the speakers shared their stories. Each account echoed the pain I felt inside, a collective mourning for the lives that would never return. I closed my eyes, letting the soft murmur of the crowd wash over me. "We will not forget," someone said, their voice steady yet filled with emotion. I nodded to myself, knowing that forgetting was not an option. "Sarah." A familiar voice broke through my reverie. I turned to see Maria, a neighbor and fellow mother, approaching with tears glistening in her eyes. "I'm so sorry for what happened," she said, pulling me into a tight embrace. "We have to fight for change." "Thank you, Maria," I replied, my voice catching. I can't believe it's been months. It feels like just yesterday." She nodded, her expression filled with understanding. "I know. But we owe it to them, to speak out, to make sure this doesn't happen again." As we stood together, the crowd began to chant, their voices rising in a unified plea for justice. No more violence. No more hate. The words resonated deep within me, fueling a fire I didn't know I had. I glanced around, seeing the faces of so many, friends, family, strangers, each one a testament to the resilience of a community brought to its knees but refusing to stay down. Then a figure stepped up to the microphone, a local activist known for her passionate speeches. "We must demand stricter gun laws," she proclaimed, her voice ringing out with conviction. "We cannot allow this tragedy to become just another statistic. We need to hold those in power accountable." The crowd erupted into applause, and I felt a rush of determination swell within me. I wanted to be part of that change. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted as a journalist approached the stage, a serious look etched on his face. There are new developments regarding the shooter, he began, his tone somber. It appears he wasn't acting alone. Recent investigations indicate that he was connected to a larger extremist group. Gasps rippled through the crowd and I felt my heart race. I exchanged a glance with Maria, who looked just as stunned. "What does this mean?" she whispered, concern etched in her features. "It means we need to know more," I replied, a mix of fear and anger bubbling within me. This isn't just about one man anymore. As the journalist continued, revealing the shocking details of Derek's affiliations, my mind raced back to that fateful day. I thought of Javier, the brave security guard who had tried to protect us. I remembered his face, the way he had charged toward danger without hesitation. Now it seemed he had been investigating these groups in secret, putting his life on the line to keep us safe. I felt a surge of anger as I realized that his dedication had cost him so much. "He deserves justice," I murmured to Maria, my voice firm. "We all do. We need to honor their sacrifice by fighting against the hate that led to this." The vigil continued, but my mind was already racing ahead. I envisioned a world where future generations wouldn't have to fear the violence that had haunted us. I imagined rallies, petitions, a community united against the darkness. As the candles flickered, I made a silent vow. I would not let the memory of those lost fade away. I would fight for stricter gun laws, for a safer future for my son, for all our children. The road ahead would be long and arduous, but I was ready. Together with my community, I would turn our grief into action, our hate into love. And as I stood there, surrounded by the flickering lights and the voices of my neighbors, I felt a sense of hope, a bittersweet victory for those left behind. We were not just survivors, we were warriors in the fight against hatred. Story 3. The fluorescent lights of Walmart flickered overhead as I navigated the familiar aisles. A shopping list crumpled in one hand while the other held tightly to my son Jake's small, eager hand. His excitement was palpable and I couldn't help but smile at his boundless energy. "Look, Mom. They have the new dinosaur toys," he exclaimed, his eyes shining like stars as he pointed towards a display of brightly colored figures. "Maybe we can get one after we finish shopping," I replied, giving his hand a gentle squeeze. The thought of a small treat for him once our errands were complete felt like a well-deserved reward. It was a Saturday afternoon, and the store buzzed with families, each person wrapped up in their own world, blissfully unaware of the darkness that sometimes lurked just beyond the surface of everyday life. As we turned the corner into the electronics section, I noticed a man lingering a few feet away. His clothes were nondescript, a faded baseball cap pulled low over his brow. He seemed out of place, watching the crowd with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. I quickly diverted my gaze, focusing instead on Jake, who was now lost in the glow of a display screen showcasing the latest video games. "Mom, can we look at the games?" Jake asked, his voice a mix of hope and impatience. "Just a moment, sweetheart," I replied, my attention still divided. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the unease that had settled in my stomach. Just then, the man approached me, his demeanor shifting from observer to participant. "Excuse me," he said, his voice smooth but with an unsettling edge. "Could you help me find the electronics section? I'm a bit lost." I hesitated, instinctively pulling Jake closer to me. "It's just down that aisle," I pointed, trying to remain polite while feeling an inexplicable wariness. "Thanks," he said, but instead of turning away he stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "I really appreciate it. You know how hectic it gets in here." I bent down to meet his gaze, trying to keep my tone light. "It can be overwhelming. Is there anything specific you're looking for?" As I engaged with him, a cold shiver ran down my spine. Something about his smile didn't reach his eyes. I felt a jolt of alarm, an instinctual warning that made my heart race. "Jake, why don't you go look at those games for a moment?" I suggested, hoping to create a little distance. "Okay, Mom," Jake replied, darting off towards the colorful displays, blissfully unaware of the tension that had suddenly wrapped around me like a tight coil. I turned my attention back to the man. "Is there anything else you need?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. "You have a lovely boy. He's very special." A knot formed in my stomach. "Thank you." I forced a smile, taking a small step back. "But I really need to get back to him." "Of course," he said, backing off slightly but not without a lingering gaze that felt like ice on my skin. "Just be careful. You never know who's watching." His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken menace. I didn't respond. Instead, I turned, scanning the aisle for Jake. He was engrossed in picking up various game cases, his innocence a stark contrast to the chill that gripped me. "Jake," I called out, my voice a touch sharper than intended. He glanced back, his face lighting up with a grin. "Look at this one, Mom. It's a dinosaur game," he exclaimed, holding up the box triumphantly. "Let's get that and then finish our shopping, okay?" I said, forcing a lightness into my tone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. As I moved to join him, I cast one last glance over my shoulder. The man was gone, but the sense of unease lingered in the pit of my stomach, a shadow that tainted the bright colors of the toys and games surrounding us. I took a deep breath, trying to shake it off. After all, it was just a trip to the store, right? Just a regular Saturday. But as we turned to head towards the checkout, I couldn't shake the feeling that the air had thickened around us, charged with a tension I couldn't quite name. It was just a shopping trip, but something told me that the day was far from ordinary. I crouched down to Jake's level, adjusting the straps of his backpack while he animatedly pointed out a colorful toy display just a few feet away. "Mommy, look at that dinosaur. Can we get it?" His eyes sparkled with excitement, and for a moment, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The mundane chaos of shopping had drowned out the unsettling sensation that had gripped me moments earlier when that man approached. "Just a second, sweetheart," I said, glancing around, the instinctive urge to ensure our safety still nagging at the back of my mind. The man, Victor, had seemed harmless enough when he'd asked for directions, but there was something off about his eyes, a predatory glint that sent a shiver down my spine. I shook off my apprehension, focusing instead on Jake's innocent joy. Suddenly the atmosphere shifted. I barely had time to react when I saw Victor moving toward us with alarming speed. My heart raced as he lunged for Jake. "No!" I screamed, instinct kicking in as I pulled Jake close to me, clutching him against my chest as if I could shield him from everything dark and dangerous in the world. "Let him go," Victor growled, his voice deep and menacing, a stark contrast to the cheerful banter of the parking lot moments ago. Panic surged through me and I felt every muscle in my body tense as I stood my ground. "Get away from us," I shouted, my voice trembling with fear and rage. Bystanders began to notice the commotion. Heads turned and whispers spread like wildfire. I could see confusion etched on the faces of shoppers and families, their expressions shifting from bewilderment to alarm. "Help! Somebody help us!" I cried out, desperation clawing at my throat. My grip tightened around Jake and I could feel his small body quaking against me, his fear palpable. "Mommy, I'm scared," he whimpered, his voice barely more than a whisper. My heart shattered at the sound, but I forced myself to remain strong. "I'm right here, baby. Just hold on to me," I reassured him, my voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around us. Victor's eyes burned with frustration, and I could see him trying to calculate his next move. "You can't protect him forever," he spat, desperation creeping into his tone as he lunged again. I sidestepped, instinctively creating distance between us as I shouted for help again. A man tall and robust rushed forward from the crowd. "Hey, back off," he yelled, his authoritative voice cutting through the tension in the air. I recognized the determination in his eyes. He was a protector, someone who refused to stand by idly. "Call the police," he shouted to another bystander who fumbled with his phone in a panic. I felt a rush of gratitude toward this stranger as he stepped up, a beacon of hope in this nightmare. Victor faltered for a moment, his focus shifting to the growing crowd. "You'll regret this," he snarled, but I could see the uncertainty in his posture. The urgency of the situation hung thick in the air, and I could sense that he was losing control. "Stay away from us," I yelled again, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it might burst. I could see the fear mirrored in Jake's eyes, and it fueled my determination. I wouldn't let him take my son. Not today. "Mommy, please," Jake cried, clutching my shirt tightly. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him as if I could shield him from the malevolence that lurked in the shadows. I could feel the warmth of his small body, a stark contrast to the cold dread that enveloped me. "Help is coming, buddy. Just a little longer," I whispered, my voice fierce yet soothing. But deep inside, a storm of fear raged. What was going to happen next? Would this man really try to take Jake from me? The very thought made bile rise in my throat, but I knew I had to stay strong. The crowd began to close in, their faces a mix of shock and determination as they stepped forward. I could hear frantic murmurs and whispers around us, but all I could focus on was the man before me, Victor, the looming threat to my child. I felt my heart pounding in my chest as the chaos erupted around me. The parking lot of Walmart, once filled with the mundane sounds of shopping carts and distant chatter, had transformed into a scene of sheer panic. Victor's grip on Jake was relentless, but my determination was fiercer. I clutched my son tightly, feeling his little body trembling against mine, and a primal instinct surged within me. Let him go. I screamed, my voice raw with fear and anger. I could see the shock on the faces of the bystanders as they watched the struggle unfold. Some were frozen in disbelief, while others began to step forward, spurred by a sudden rush of courage. Back away. Everyone back away, a commanding voice cut through the chaos. I turned to see a tall man with a strong build, his face set with determination. It was Tom, a former police officer, whose presence alone seemed to galvanize the crowd. We need to subdue him. Help me. The crowd shifted and I felt a flicker of hope. I managed to push Victor back a few steps, buying us a moment of precious time. Stay close to me, Jake, I urged, glancing down to reassure him. He nodded, his wide eyes filled with fear, but I could see the glimmer of trust in them. Someone grab his arms. Tom shouted, and I watched as two men rushed forward, their faces set with purpose. They lunged at Victor, who was recovering from my shove, but he was still a wild animal, desperate and dangerous. Get off me. Victor snarled, twisting and kicking as he fought against the growing number of hands that sought to restrain him. Panic surged in my veins again, but I forced myself to focus. I couldn't let him take Jake. I wouldn't let him. With a surge of adrenaline, I stepped forward, pushing against Victor's chest with all my strength. You're not getting my son. Not now, not ever. The words poured out of me, fueled by a fierce protectiveness I never knew I possessed. Lisa, get back. Tom shouted, but I felt a wild determination. I needed to stand my ground to show Victor that I would not back down. In that moment, I was not just a mother, I was a shield, a barrier between my child and the darkness that threatened to consume us. Victor's eyes darted around, calculating, desperate. You think this is over? He hissed, his face contorting with rage as the two men finally managed to get his arms pinned behind his back. You have no idea what you're in for. The crowd gasped collectively and I felt a chill creep down my spine. Shut up. I yelled, my voice trembling slightly, but I held my ground. I wasn't scared of him. I was terrified of what could happen if I let fear take hold. With a final effort, Tom and the men pushed Victor to the ground, the hard pavement echoing his grunt of pain. I stepped back, my breath coming in short gasps as I pulled Jake into my arms, holding him tightly against me, trying to shield him from the horror of what had just occurred. Is he going to hurt us again? Jake's voice was small, and I felt my heart break at the fear in his words. I hugged him closer, the warmth of his body grounding me in the chaos. No, sweetheart. He can't hurt us anymore, I whispered, though the tremor in my voice betrayed my own uncertainty. I looked around at the onlookers, their faces a mix of shock and relief, and I realized how quickly our lives could shift from normalcy to terror. As Tom and the others restrained Victor, I caught snippets of their conversation. Call 911. We need to make sure he doesn't get away, Tom ordered, his authoritative tone cutting through the tension. I watched as one of the men pulled out his phone, his fingers shaking slightly as he dialed. Stay with me, Jake, I said softly, brushing his hair back from his forehead. You're safe. I promise. I could feel my heart rate begin to slow, but the fear still lingered at the edges of my mind. What had we just escaped? What did Victor mean when he said this wasn't over? Suddenly, a siren wailed in the distance, approaching rapidly. Relief washed over me, but it was tinged with anxiety. I knew this was just the beginning, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows lurking behind Victor were still very much alive, waiting for the right moment to strike again. My heart pounded in my chest as Victor lay restrained on the ground, the chaos of the parking lot swirling around us. I clutched Jake tightly to my side, feeling the warmth of his small body against mine, a stark reminder of what I had fought to protect. The crowd that had gathered murmured in disbelief, their faces a blend of shock and anger. Some people exchanged worried glances, while others pointed at Victor, who struggled against the grip of Tom and the other Good Samaritans. Is he going to hurt us again? Jake's voice trembled, breaking through the din of the crowd. I looked down at my son, his eyes wide and innocent, desperately trying to make sense of the chaos. No, honey, I reassured him, forcing a calmness I didn't feel into my voice. He can't hurt us anymore. My fingers tightened around Jake's small shoulders as I scanned the parking lot, searching for any sign of additional threats. The world felt distorted, like everything was happening in slow motion, and I was merely a spectator in my own life. Just then a police car pulled into the lot, its lights flashing blue and red, cutting through the gathering dusk. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly overshadowed by a gnawing anxiety. I wanted to believe that safety was just a few moments away, but the fear still clung to me like a shadow. The officers rushed out, their expressions serious. "What happened here?" one of them called out, his voice authoritative as he approached the scene. Tom, still holding Victor down, gestured to me. "This woman, she was attacked. This man tried to take her son." I felt the weight of the officer's gaze turn to me, and I took a deep breath, preparing to explain. "I was in the store with Jake and he approached me asking for directions. Then out of nowhere he tried to grab Jake." My voice wavered, the memory of Victor's cold hands reaching for my son sending chills down my spine. The officer nodded, his expression softening as he noticed my distress. "We'll take it from here. You did the right thing. Just stay calm." As they cuffed Victor and lifted him to his feet, I couldn't help but notice the smirk curling at the corners of his mouth. It sent a shiver down my spine. Why wasn't he panicking? Why did he look so amused? "Mommy, who is that man?" Jake asked, his small voice barely above a whisper. I knelt beside him, brushing a few strands of hair from his forehead. "He's just a bad man, Jake. He won't hurt you anymore, I promise." The officer in charge, a tall man with a clean-shaven face, turned to me as he began to question me further. "Can you give us a description of what happened? Any details you remember might help us." I nodded, piecing together the fragments of the terrifying ordeal. He approached me looking for help. It all happened so fast. One moment I was helping him, and the next he lunged for Jake. "Did he say anything else? Any names or phrases that caught your attention?" I shook my head slowly, feeling the weight of his inquiry. "No, just that he needed directions." I didn't think. My voice trailed off, the realization of my naivety hitting me like a brick. I had let my guard down and it almost cost me everything. As the officers continued their questioning, I glanced back at Victor, who was now being led to a squad car. His eyes met mine and for a moment, it felt like the world had stilled around us. There was something unsettling in his gaze, something that sent another wave of fear crashing over me. "Mommy, can we go home now?" Jake asked, his voice breaking my trance. "Yes, sweetheart, we can go home," I replied, my heart aching for the innocence that had been shattered. I took his hand, squeezing it tightly. As we walked toward my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that the danger was far from over. The world felt different now, the shadows longer and more threatening. As I buckled Jake into his car seat, I glanced back at the scene, where Victor had been secured in the police car. I felt an unsettling knot in my stomach, a realization that this was just the beginning of something I couldn't yet comprehend. What had he wanted? Why had he targeted us? I shook my head, trying to dismiss the dark thoughts swirling in my mind. "Let's get some ice cream on the way home," I suggested, forcing a smile for Jake's sake. "Yay!" he exclaimed, his eyes lighting up. But even as I drove away from the parking lot, my heart was heavy, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on me. I couldn't help but wonder what awaited us beyond the safety of our home. I stood in the small interrogation room, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like a swarm of angry bees. My heart was still racing, the echoes of the parking lot chaos replaying in my mind. Jake was safe, that much I knew, but the sinister presence of Victor lingered in the air like a noxious fog. He sat across from me, an unsettling calmness washing over him as if he were merely waiting for a bus rather than facing the consequences of his actions. "Do you really think you can get away with this?" I spat, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. I leaned forward, fists clenched, desperately wanting to shake him out of that eerie composure. Victor looked at me, the corners of his mouth twitching into a smile that sent chills down my spine. "Get away with what, Lisa? A little misunderstanding? I was just trying to help." His tone dripped with mock innocence and I felt my stomach churn. "Help? You mean trying to snatch my son?" I shot back, my words sharp like daggers. The room felt suffocating, the walls closing in as I fought to keep my composure. The detective, a stern-looking woman with dark hair pulled back into a tight bun, interjected. "We have your history, Victor. You won't be getting away with anything this time." I could see the determination in her eyes as she laid out the evidence of his past crimes, each word striking me like a hammer against an anvil. Victor's eyes gleamed with a twisted amusement. "History? You think that matters? People forget, they move on. But I don't forget." He leaned back in his chair as if he were settling in for a long conversation. "You should consider that, Lisa. You're in way over your head." I felt a cold sweat break out across my brow. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, afraid of the answer. "Oh, you'll find out soon enough," he replied, a knowing smirk stretching across his face. "I know more about you than you realize." A wave of horror washed over me at the thought that this man had been lurking in the shadows of my life, planning something beyond my comprehension. How could someone like him exist, so casually threatening the safety of my family? My mind raced back to Jake, to the innocent laughter that filled our home, now overshadowed by the dark reality of this encounter. The detective shot Victor a scrutinizing glare. Enough games. We know you've been tracking her. What's your end game? Victor simply shrugged, his demeanor almost mocking. End game? I'm just a pawn in a much larger game, detective. I felt my breath hitch, the weight of his words crushing me. Pawn? What kind of nightmare was I trapped in? My thoughts spiraled as I recalled the moments leading up to the kidnapping attempt. The man in the parking lot, the way he had approached me, and the sickening realization that he had been watching us long before that day. Suddenly Victor's gaze locked onto mine, and the air in the room shifted. You have no idea what's coming for you, Lisa, he said, his voice low and chilling. You think this is over? You're only at the beginning of a very long road. I felt the blood drain from my face as I tried to process the implications of his statements. I wanted to scream, to claw at the walls of that suffocating room, but all I could do was stare back at him, my mind racing with fear and confusion. As the detective prepared to take Victor away, he leaned forward, his voice a mere whisper. Remember my words, Lisa. You can't hide from what's already been set in motion. When the door clicked shut behind them, I slumped into the chair, shaking. The room was filled with an oppressive silence, broken only by the distant sounds of the precinct. Jake was safe for now, but the reality was sinking in. Victor was just the tip of the iceberg, and whatever darkness he was part of was lurking just beyond my reach. I felt a deep sense of dread settling into my bones, knowing I had to protect my son from this unseen threat, whatever it might be. As the police led Victor away in handcuffs, I felt a strange mixture of relief and dread wash over me. My heart was still pounding from the confrontation, and I could hear the echoes of my screams ringing in my ears. I clutched Jake closer to me, his small body trembling against my side. I had finally managed to protect him, but the sense of safety felt thin, as if it could shatter at any moment. Mommy, I'm scared, Jake whispered, looking up at me with wide, innocent eyes. His fear pierced my heart, and I forced myself to smile, brushing a strand of hair behind his ear. I know, sweetheart, but you're safe now. I won't let anything happen to you, I promised, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. Just then I caught Victor's gaze as he was being escorted to a police car. His eyes were dark, almost hollow, but there was a glimmer of something, malice perhaps, that sent another chill down my spine. You have no idea, Lisa, he called out, his voice dripping with an unsettling calmness. This was just the beginning. The words hung in the air like a thick fog, and I felt a shudder run through me. What did he mean by that? My mind raced, trying to piece together the implications of his statement. Before I could voice my concerns, one of the officers approached me, his expression serious but kind. Ma'am, we need to ask you a few questions. Can you tell me what happened back there? He said, gesturing toward the chaos that had just unfolded. I nodded, my throat tight. I was just trying to help him with directions when I paused, taking a deep breath. When he grabbed Jake. I didn't even see it coming. The officer scribbled notes, his brow furrowed in concentration. Did you notice anything unusual about him before that? Any conversation that seemed out of place? I shook my head, recalling the moment with a clarity that felt eerie. No, he seemed normal, at first. Just a lost man asking for help. As I spoke, I couldn't shake the feeling that Victor was somehow tied to something much larger than just a random kidnapping attempt. The way he had looked at me as if he knew me, sent a wave of nausea through me. After the officer finished his questions, I turned back to watch Victor being loaded into the police car. A knot of anxiety coiled in my stomach as I realized that he wasn't just some crazed stranger. He was a calculated threat. Once the commotion died down and the police began to disperse the crowd, I finally allowed myself to breathe. Jake, still trembling, clung to my side as we walked to my car. I could hear the distant sirens fading into the night, but my mind was still racing with unanswered questions. As I strapped Jake into his car seat, I noticed a police officer approaching us again. Ma'am, we found something on Victor when we searched him. We're still investigating, but it seems he might not be acting alone. There may be a larger conspiracy at play. My heart sank. What do you mean? Is my family in danger? I asked, desperate for reassurance. The officer hesitated, his expression grave. We don't know yet, but we'll keep you updated. Just stay vigilant, okay? If you see anything unusual, report it immediately. I nodded, but inside, fear gripped me like a vice. The darkness of the situation loomed larger than before, and as I drove Jake home, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Once home, after tucking Jake into bed, I sat on the edge of his mattress, my mind racing. The walls of our home felt suddenly claustrophobic, each creak of the floorboards echoing loudly in the silence. I picked up my phone, my hands trembling as I dialed my best friend, desperate for comfort, but all I got was voicemail. Just as I was about to set the phone down, it buzzed to life in my hand. The screen lit up with an unknown number. My heart raced again as I answered. "Hello," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Lisa," a cold voice replied, sending ice through my veins. "You really should start looking over your shoulder. Victor was just a pawn, and you have no idea what's coming next." The line went dead, leaving me staring at the phone, breathless. My world had just shifted again, and the haunting dread that had settled in my chest tightened its grip. Who could I trust?